Hey friends, what's up? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Yud Zayin, Daf 17 of Masechta Beitzah. Friends, on Daf 17, we start off with a sugya that may be familiar from Masechta Eruvey, where we discussed this as well. The tefillas of Yom Tiv when it falls out on Shabbos will likely be somewhat familiar just from our practice on Yom Tiv, in terms of what Shemoneh esrei we use and which brachas to say. And then we go back to continuing about eruvey tavshilin. What happens if you forgot to put out an eruvey tavshilin? What if you ignored the fact that you didn't make an eruvey tavshilin and you cooked anyways? What happens? Can you eat that? And then we will conclude the daf with an alternative suggestion for the machlokas between Beitzah and Beitzah regarding how many foods you need to prepare for an eruvey tavshilin. Friends, let's jump in. Daf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph, 2 lines from the top. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught Yom Tov shechalios b'Shabbos. Okay, Yom Tov that falls out on Shabbos. We have Sukkot coming up. So what happens if the first day of Sukkot, of course this year, all the Chagim are in the middle of the week, which makes a nice challenge to get in your work between all the Yom Tov. Anyways, so what happens though in years where the first day of Yom Tov or Yom Tov is on Shabbos? So let's say the first day of Sukkot is a Shabbos. So in terms of Shemoneh esrei, so which Shemoneh esrei do you daven? So Beishamai Omer Mispal Shemoneh. So Beishamai says you can daven in 8 brachas Shemoneh esrei. Now, generally on Shabbos and in Yom Tov we have 7 brachas in the Shemoneh esrei. Of course, the first 3 and the last 3 that are always there: Mogen Avraham, Mechayim Mesim, Atakadosh, and then Amach Zeshchinos L'Tzion, and Atoshim Chol Choneh L'Odos, and Amroi Chasam Yisrael B'Shalom. Those are in every Shemoneh esrei. Now on Shabbos and on Yom Tov we add another bracha. On Shabbos Mekadesh HaShabbos, on Yom Tov Mekadesh Yisrael V'Azmanim. So now says Beis Shammai, you're going to daven 8 brachas in the Shemoneh esrei when Yom Tov and Shabbos coincide. 1 for Shabbos, 1 for Yom Tov. Okay. V'omer shel Shabbos b'fnei atzma v'shel Yom Tov b'fnei atzma. So you have a separate bracha for Shabbos, separate bracha for Yom Tov. That's what Beis Shammai says. Beis Hillel Omer mispal sheva. Beis Hillel says you merge them, a merger. You have 1 additional bracha, kilu, the 6 regular ones, plus 1 more. And that is a merger between Shabbos and Yom Tov. Mispal Sheva says Beis Hillel you daven 7 brachas in the Shemoneh esrei, Maschil b'shel Shabbos, Misayim b'shel Shabbos, Vomer Kedushas Hayom be'emtza. So according to Beis Hillel, so you start with Shabbos, you end with Shabbos. What does it mean that you end with Shabbos? You say, Baruch Atah Hashem Mikadesh HaShabbos. So now, of course, we're going to see Rebbe's opinion in a second, which is what we do, which is Mikadesh HaShabbos v'Yisrael v'Azmanim. But says Beis Hillel, we don't mention Yisrael v'Azmanim. Rather, you'll have 1 bracha, you'll start with Shabbos, and then you'll move on to Yom Tov, and then you'll say Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadesh HaShabbos. What does it mean that you start with Shabbos and then move on to Yom Tov? So this is familiar for us, I'm sure. So for example, V'atiten lanu, right, you'll start with the Ata v'chaton mikol ha'amim, v'after Yisonu v'tzizabanu, etc. Then we'll say V'atiten lanu Hashem Elokeinu, and first we say Shabbos. V'ava Shabbosos limnucha, right? And then what was it? Shabbos limnucha zmanim l'sasun, Chag zmanim l'sasun es yom, whatever the holiday is. So we first mention Shabbos, and then we mention the holiday, and then we go weiter, and then at the end we say Baruch Atah Hashem Mikadesh HaShabbos. That is the opinion of Beis Hillel. Rebbe Omer says Rebbe, while he agrees with Beis Hillel most of the way, he says Av Chosim Ba, that in the concluding bracha you also mention the Yom Tov, which is Mikadesh HaShabbos Yisrael V'Azmanim. That the Eibishter who makes Shabbos holy, as well as makes the Yidden holy, who then decide when Rosh Chodesh is and decide when the Zmanim are going to be, when the Yomim Tovim are going to be. Right, Mekadesh HaShabbos, that the Eibishter makes Shabbos holy every 7 days. Memelish, the day becomes holy. And then Yisrael, the Eibishter makes the Yidden holy. and gives them the power to determine when Rosh Chodesh is. And then based, of course, as we know from the recent dafs, based on whenever the Yidden declare Rosh Chodesh, that is how we determine when the Chagim are going to be, right? If Elul has 30 days, an extra, right? It's a leap month, so then Sukkot starts a day later. If Elul is 29 days, it's a shorter month, so then Sukkot starts a day earlier. Keilu, the Chagim are determined based on when the Yidden establish the months. So basically, the Eibishter makes Shabbos holy memele. Every 7 days it becomes holy no matter what, nothing to do with us. Whereas the Yom Tovim are dependent on our input, on our participation in determining when the month starts, and then based on whenever the first day of the month is, which we then determine when the Yom Tovim start. So again, Mikadesh HaShabbos, the Eibishter makes Shabbos holy, as well as V'Yisrael also makes the Yidden holy, who in turn, Ve'azmanim, determine when Yom Tov is going to be. Tanitana, Kamadu Ravino, there was a teacher of Beitzah who taught in front of Ravino, Mikadesh Yisrael, Ve'ashabbos, Ve'azman. So now this teacher said that what Rebbe says is Mikadesh Yisrael, that the Eibishter makes a Yidden holy, Ve'ashabbos and holy, and Shabbos, Ve'azmanim and the Yom Tovim, which implies that that the Yidden determine when Shabbos is going to be. To which he says, Omerle, Ravina responds, Atu Shabbos Yisrael Mikad Shele. What, do the Yidden determine when Shabbos is going to be? Shabbos happens every 7 days, whether we determine it or not. It's irrelevant. It has nothing to do with us. Shabbos Mikad Shevakaima. Shabbos is Memele holy. Every 7 days at sundown, Shabbos. Elaima Makadesh HaShabbos Yisrael Ve'azmanim. Rather say that the Eibishter makes Shabbos holy, as well as the Yidden, who then in turn make the Yom Tovim holy. Rav Yosef and Rav Yosef says that the halacha is like Rebbe, as Ravina explained just now, right? That the Eibishter makes Shabbos holy and makes the Yidden holy, who then make the Yom Tovim holy. So the halacha lemaise, what we do, at least Ashkenazim, I assume the Sfarim as well, is a combination between Beis Hillel and Rebbe, which is that when Yom Tov falls out on Shabbos, we say the Yom Tov Shemoneh esrei, right? We go to the back of the siddur, we say the Yom Tov Shemoneh esrei, that there is for Shachris, Mincha, and Ma'ariv. We say Vatitin Lana Shem Lakinu Ba'ahava, Shabbosos Limnucha, Moadim, whatever, Shabbosos Limnucha, Chagim Zmanim Nusasim, whatever it is, as Yom, whatever. So we start with Shabbos, we then move on to Yom Tov, and then we say Baruch Atah Hashem, Mikadesh HaShabbos V'Yisrael Ve'azmanim. That is our Yom Tov Dika Shemoneh esrei, Gevaldig. Tana Rabbana, the rabbis taught, Shabbos Shchalios B'Rosh Chodesh. What happens when Shabbos falls out on Rosh Chodesh? Or B'Chul HaShamoed. What do you do Shabbos Chol HaMoed? So says the Gemara, Arvis V'Shachris U'Mincha. Okay, so when it comes to Ma'ariv, Shachris, and Mincha, what do you guys think? What do we do? Think back to, we're gonna have Shabbos Chol HaMoed soon. What do we do? So it's a regular Shemoneh, so you just say Ya'alav Yavo. Mispal Sheva, so you say the regular Shabbos Shemoneh esrei. V'omer me'ena moar b'avod, and you say Ya'alav Yavo in Ritzei. Okay, so when Shabbos, you have Shabbos Rosh Chodesh or Shabbos Chol HaMoed, by Shacharis, Mincha, and Ma'ariv, it's just going to be a regular Shabbos Dika Shemoneh esrei, and you say Ya'alav Yavo. Uv Musafin, Rabbi Eliezer, Omer says Rabbi Eliezer, no, whoa, I skipped. What was it? Omer me'ena moar b'avoda. V'im lo Omer machzirin also. And of course, as probably I'm sure many of us are aware, if you forget to say Ya'alav Yavo, you have to go back and repeat the Shemoneh esrei. Rabbi Eliezer Omer b'odah, Rabbi Eliezer says that this isn't, this Ya'alav Yavo is not in Ritzei. Rather, we mentioned Rosh Chodesh or the Yom Tov in Hodah, in the bracha after Ritzei. In Atovshim Chol Chonei Lodos, kind of like on Purim and on Chanukah, we say Al Anisim. So that's where you would insert the insert for the Yom Tov according to Rabbi Eliezer. Uv Musafin. Okay, so that answers for Shacharis, Mincha, and Ma'ariv. What about Musaf? Maschil b'shal Shabbos u'Musayim b'shal Shabbos ve'omer Kedusha Sayom be'emtza. So when it comes to Musaf, however, you do the Yom Tov Dike Shemoneh, esrei. Now, when it comes to Musaf, however, right? So if you think about, Shabbos Rosh Chodesh or Shabbos Yom, Shabbos Chol HaMoed. So when it comes to Musaf, we then flip to the back of the siddur and we pull out the Shalosh Regalim Musaf, and there we will mention Shabbos, and then we'll mention the Musaf, the festival, and then say Baruch Atah Hashem Mikadesh Yisrael, Mikadesh Shabbos v'Yisrael ve'azmanim. Or if it's Rosh Chodesh, we'll say what's that called on Rosh Chodesh? Atu Yotzarta Olamcha Mikedem. So that'll be sort of a Rosh Chodesh version of the Shabbos Shemoneh Esrei. But also the point being that you would start with Shabbos, mention Rosh Chodesh, and then say Mikadesh HaShabbos v'Yisrael ve'azman Rosh Chodashim, I guess. Okay. Givaldig. Where are we? Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Rabbi Shmuel ben Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka Omrim. Okay. So say Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Rabbi Shmuel ben Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka Kol makom shuzkak l'sheva, that whenever you need a 7 bracha Shemoneh Esrei. So ki'ilu on Shabbos Chol HaMoed, even Shachris, Mincha, and Ma'ariv, where right, it's a 7 bracha Shemoneh Esrei because it's Shabbos. Maschil b'shel Shabbos u'Mesayim b'shel Shabbos v'Omer Kedushas Hayom be'emtza. So says Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel and Rabbi Shmuel ben Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka that on Shabbos Chol HaMoed or Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, even at Shachris, Mincha, and Ma'ariv, you would say kilu a Yom Tov Dika Shemoneh Esrei. You would mention Shabbos and then the Yom Tov with the Rosh Chodesh and then Mikadesh HaShabbos v'Yisrael ve'azmanim of Rosh Chodashim. Rav Huna in halacha koso. So Rav Huna says that the halacha is not like this pair, like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel and Rabbi Yochanan ben Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shmuel ben Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka. And from our own practice, we can confirm this, that when you have Shabbos Chol HaMoed or Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, Shachris, Mincha, and Ma'ariv is going to be the regular Shabbos Shemoneh Esrei with Ya'aleh v'Yavo, not Kilo Yom Tov Dika Shemoneh Esrei. Amar Reb Chiya bar Ashi, says the holy Reb Chiya bar Ashi, Amar Rab, the name of Rab, Maniach Adam eruvey tchumin miyom tov lachavero umasne. Says Reb Chiya bar Ashi, Amar Rab, that a fellow can leave out an eruvey tchumin from one Yom Tov to the next and make a Tanai. Fellow friends, you hear this? So let's say you have Yom Tov Thursday, Friday. So you have Yom Tov Thursday, Friday. So it says of Chiya bar Ashi Amar Rab that let's say you forgot to put out an eruvey tchumin. You wanted to travel from one place to the next. So what you could do is you could leave out an eruvey tchumin on Thursday, I guess for Friday, and say, look, mimanavshach, right? If we're assuming Sveika Dioma here, that one day is going to be Yom Tov, one day is technically speaking a weekday. So you could say, look, we have Yom Tov on Thursday and Friday. Memele, one of them is Yom Tov, one of them isn't. So you could put out an eruvey tchumin on Thursday for Friday, and say, look, if today is Yom Tov, so Memele tomorrow is not. So I can travel wherever I want anyways. And if today is a weekday and tomorrow is Yom Tov, so I'm putting out eruvey tchumin on a weekday for Yom Tov. So Memele, says Rav Chiya bar Ashi Amar Rab, that that would be acceptable, relying upon the Sveika Dioma to be able to put out an eruvey tchumin on Thursday for Friday. On my Rave, tavshilin miyom tov lachavero masne. Says Rave, if in the same situation, Yom Tov is Thursday, Friday, going into Shabbos, and he forgot to put out an eruvey tavshilin on Wednesday, and now he's asking himself, what am I going to do? How can I prepare on Friday for Shabbos? So on Thursday, he could take a cooked, take a cooked dish and leave it out for Shabbos. And he could say, it's very interesting though, when's he gonna cook the dish? Is he gonna cook the dish on Thursday? Because then if he cooks the dish on Thursday, so then how can he cook something on Yom Tov for a different day? And if he's something that's already cooked, then does it count? I guess maybe that goes back to the machlokas between Rav Ashi and Rava about how exactly, what's kind of the point of the eruvey tavshilin. If it's that I'm starting to cook now for Yom Tiv, so then maybe if it's already cooked, or for Shabbos, then maybe if it's already cooked, then that wouldn't necessarily work. Interesting shayla. Akoponim, but at least, so regardless of when he's going to be cooking this food, that sounds like an interesting question, but in terms of the actual eruv itself, the eruvey tavshilin, Rava says, look, you can make an eruvey tavshilin on Thursday and say mimonav shah. If today is Yom Tiv, so memele tomorrow Friday is not Yom Tiv, so I could be cooking anyways on Friday for Shabbos. And if today is a weekday, so I'm just putting on my eruvey tavshilin today, and therefore I'll be able to cook tomorrow on Yom Tiv based on the fact that I'm putting on eruvey tavshilin today on a weekday. So Keilu says Rava, you could put out an eruvey tavshilin on Thursday for Friday, mimonav shach, and it'll work. Manda Omer eruvey tchumin koshken eruvey tavshilin. Rav Chibar Ashi says that you're allowed to put out an eruvey tchumin on Thursday for Friday. So memele, you can also put out an eruvey tavshilin from Thursday for Friday. Manda Omer eruvey tavshilin aval eruvey tchumin lo. But Rava, who says that you could put out an eruvey tavshilin from Thursday for Friday, but he would say that you would not be allowed to do the same for eruvey tchumin. My timer, what's the difference between eruvey tavshilin versus eruvey tchumin? Why are we more stringent when it comes to eruvey tchumin? Because to be kona shvisa on Shabbos, right? To be kona shvisa on Shabbos, and as Rashi points out, we don't necessarily mean Shabbos. Yom Tov is also called Shabbos. Very interesting. So to be able to be kona shvisa, because that's the whole thing of eruvey tchumin, is that you're basically putting out some bread somewhere and saying, this is where I'm spending Shabbos, kona shvisa. This is where I'm spending Shabbos at the location of my bread. So to be able to on Shabbos or Yom Tov, to be kona shvisa, to say that this is where I'm going to be spending sort of the next day of Yom Tov, so that doesn't work already on Yom Tov. But in eruvey tavshilin, you would be able to make that stipulation and make the t'nai in order to cook on Friday of Yom Tiv for Shabbos. Alright, very interesting stuff. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught ein ofen Yom Tiv lachaveru. Okay, you can't cook from one Yom Tiv to the next Yom Tiv. There's a goes with Tziyunim over here that changed it from Yom Tiv for Shabbos, and certainly not from Yom Tiv for a weekday. Okay, Be'emesamar they said Mimala isha kol aktera basar afapisha in tzricha elachticha achas. Interesting. We say that a woman would be allowed to fill up an entire pot of meat even though she only needs one piece of it. And the point being that because it doesn't take any more effort to cook an entire pot of meat versus to cook one piece of meat. Keilu, at least once it's going, right? Right? If you're going to have a big pot and you're already cooking one piece of meat, so then the fire doesn't have to work any harder to cook more pieces of meat. So therefore it's considered one effort, and that would be acceptable. So even though she only needs one piece of meat, but memela, once she's already cooking it, she can fill up the pot. A baker could fill up a barrel and fill it up with water, even though he really only needs one pitcher. Because also, once the water is flowing into the barrel, it's not any more difficult to just let it fill up more. But to bake, you can only bake only what you need, because to bake, each bread you have to put into the oven, you have to take it out of the oven. It's going to be more, you have to stick it up on the wall, take it down. It's more of an effort for each individual bread. Reb Shimon ben Elazar almost says, Reb Shimon ben Elazar, isha kol tanur pas, that a woman is allowed to fill up the entire oven with bread, because there is a real nafkamina between one loaf of bread versus many breads, in that the bread bakes better when the oven is full, and therefore you want to fill up the oven so you can bake the bread better. So therefore, says Reb Shimon ben Elazar, that you would be allowed to fill up the oven with bread so that the bread bakes better. Amar Rava, halacha Reb Shimon ben Elazar. Rava says that this is taka the halacha. You could fill up the oven with the bread so that they bake better. Okay, so a fellow forgot to put out or deliberately didn't put out, whatever it is, he didn't put out an eruvey tavshilin. Okay. Hu neser v'kimcho neser. So do we say that maybe Taka, we are talking about somebody who forgot, because we had seen opinions recently about people who don't put out eruvey tavshilin, maybe they're called a posheya, so maybe people wouldn't be allowed to even cook for them. Let's see. Let's assume maybe it's somebody who forgot to put out an eruvey tavshilin. So hu neser v'kimcho neser. So do we say that, okay, so he's not allowed to cook on Friday for Shabbos, because he didn't put out an eruvey tavshilin. Now, what if people are going to cook for him? So he's not allowed to cook. But what if people are going to cook for him? So if they want to use his kemach, his flour, would they be allowed to use his flour? Right? So kilu, he's not allowed to cook or bake because he didn't put out an eruvey tavshilin. But would somebody be allowed to use his ingredients in order to cook for him? Or is that not allowed? He would actually have to give his ingredients to that other person, so that now the other person owns it, and then that person can cook with those ingredients once they already own it. Right? So kilu, is somebody else allowed to, so if somebody did not put out an eruvey tavshilin, and somebody else, his friend, is going to cook for him, is his friend allowed to cook for him with his ingredients, right? Reuven forgot to put out an eruvey tavshilin and Shimon's cooking for him. Can Shimon cook for him with Reuven's own ingredients? Or does Reuven have to give away his ingredients to Shimon, so that now they're Shimon's, and then Shimon can cook, what are now Shimon's ingredients for Reuven? So Ibarlu de Asakasha, Mishlaniach eruvey tavshilin. Reuven forgot to put out an eruvey tavshilin. Hu neser v'kimcho neser. So do we say that Reuven's not allowed to cook? And also, even if Shimon's going to cook for him, Shimon would not be allowed to use Reuven's flour. Reuven would have to give away his flour to Shimon. Or do we say that while Reuven is not allowed to cook, there's nothing wrong with his flour, and Shimon can use Reuven's flour to cook for Reuven? What is the nafkamine? Does he have to give away? Does Reuven have to give away his flour to Shimon? If you say that Reuven's not allowed to cook, and also his flour is off limits, so then if Shimon's going to cook for Reuven would have to give away his flour to Shimon, so that Shimon can use it to cook. And if you say that while Reuven is not allowed to cook, there's nothing wrong with his flour, so Reuven does not need to give away his flour to Shimon. Shimon can just use Reuven's flour to cook for Reuven. So what do we say? Tashma coming here. Okay. A fellow didn't put out an eruvey tavshilin. Reuven in our case. Okay, so he can't bake, he can't cook, he can't insulate things to keep them hot. Not for himself and not for other people. Okay, fine. He didn't put out an eruvey tavshilin. Basically, he can't cook for Shabbos. And guess what? Shimon can't cook for Reuven either. So what's Reuven supposed to do? Is he supposed to starve? So maknikim chol acherim ve'ofen lo muvashlan lo. Well, what Reuven can do is he can give away his flour to Shimon, and then Shimon can bake for him, can cook for him. So we see from here that Reuven is not allowed to cook, and also his products, his kemach, his flour becomes aser, i.e. he would have to give it away to Shimon. Once that happens, then Shimon can use Reuven's ingredients to cook for Reuven. Now they want to know, what if Reuven ignored the rules? Reuven didn't put out an eruvey tavshilin, so he's not allowed to cook from Friday of Yom Tov for Shabbos, but he does so anyways. He knows exactly what he's doing. He knows he's not allowed to, but he does it anyways. Now what? Tashma. So if Reuven didn't put out an eruvey tavshilin, so what does he do? So we said that he gives away his flour to Shimon, and then Shimon can bake and cook for him. Isa, and if this is also an option, that i.e., if Ruvain would end up just cooking for himself, he would still be allowed to eat it, well then lesne avrav afa mutter. So then let the Beitzah also say, by the way, if Ruvain ignored the rules and cooked anyways, he'd be allowed to eat it. So from the fact that we don't mention that, from the fact that we lemaisa leave that out, so then memele, it means that if Ruvain went ahead and cooked anyways, he would not be allowed to eat that food, as it is left out in the Beitzah in terms of ways that would be permissible for him to eat. To which Rav Ada bar Masna says that is not necessarily proof, because our Mishnah, this Beitzah is listing sort of permitted ways to be able to eat, right? Meaning things that we recommend that Ruvain should do, such as if you didn't put out an eruvey tavshilin, so then Shimon, you could give away his flour to Shimon, and Shimon can bake for him, and that's completely fine. We're not talking about a situation as what if Ruvain ignored the rules and cooked anyways. Can he eat it or not? We're not discussing, we're not going there. So therefore it's not necessarily proof to say that he wouldn't be, that the food would be asur. We didn't go down that route. It's not clear what the halacha would be in that case. Toshma, komenir. Misheniach eruvey tavshilin, hareze ofer mavashel umatmin. Okay, a fellow puts out an eruvey tavshilin, so he could bake, he could cook, he could insulate. That sounds amazing. If he wants to eat his eruvey tavshilin, the cooked food that he put out for his eruv, harishus biyado, he could do that. Ochlo ad shelo afa, ad shelo bishel ad shelo hitmin. If he ate the eruv tavshilin, however, before he baked, or before he cooked, or before he insulated, well then, hareze lo yofev lo yivashav lo yatmin, well then he cannot bake, cook, or insulate. Lo, not for him, v'lo lacherim, not for other people, v'lo lacherim ofen muvashlin lo, and other people can't bake or cook for him. Aval muvashlu lo yom tiv, but he would be allowed to cook for yom tiv. V'moser osir l'shabbos, and if there's leftover, he can eat it on Shabbos. Uvad shelo yairim, as long as he doesn't be tricky. V'imherim osir, and if he was tricky, then it's osir. Wow, there was a lot over there. What do we say? Basically, we have a Beitzah. Maybe we'll read it again in a second. Basically, we have a Beitzah that says that you got to make an eruvey tavshilin, and if you don't make an eruvey tavshilin, then you're not allowed to cook and stuff. And you're allowed to eat your eruvey tavshilin, but be careful, because if you eat your eruvey tavshilin before you cook on Friday, well then you don't have an eruvey tavshilin anymore to cook with, meaning to cook relying upon, based upon. So therefore, while you're allowed to eat your eruvey tavshilin, make sure that you only eat the eruvey tavshilin after you're done cooking, because once you're if you eat it beforehand, although we're going to see maybe once you already start cooking, then maybe you're good. Maybe at that point you could already eat it, whatever it is. But if you eat the eruvey tavshilin before you start cooking on Friday, well then you're not going to be able to use the eruvey tavshilin. So be careful. And we said, but what's the solution if a person doesn't have an eruvey tavshilin? Well, he could cook for Yom Tov Memele, right? For Friday, he's allowed to cook anyways. And if there's leftovers, so then the leftovers he can eat on Shabbos, no problem. But don't be sneaky. You wouldn't be allowed to, obviously cook more than you need. If you only need one pot, don't be cooking 2 pots and saying, oh yeah, maybe guests are going to come over, but you're not planning to have guests. And then you end up cooking for Shabbos also. Don't be sneaky. If Memele, you have leftovers, there's nothing wrong with eating the leftovers on Shabbos. Okay, so let's read this again. Toshma, come in here. Misheniach eruvey tavshilin. A fellow leaves out an eruvey tavshilin. Hareze ofer, mavashel, matman, he can cook. If you want to eat your eruvey tavshilin, that's fine. But achlo ad shelo afa, ad shelo bishel, ad shelo hitmin. But if you eat it before you cook, well then hareze lo yofev lo yivash lo yatman. Well then you can't use it anymore, and you're not going to be able to cook. Lo lov lo lacherim, not for himself, not for other people. Lo lacherim ofen muvashel lo. Other people cannot cook for him either. Although we said earlier that maybe it could be makne, is stuff to other people, and then they can't. But what he can do in any event is he would be allowed to cook for that day, for Yom Tov, so he's got food for Yom Tov. Also the Shabbos, and if there's leftovers, so memele, fine, you can eat it on Shabbos. What's the problem? But he shouldn't be sneaky. He shouldn't make a double amount and say, well, maybe, who knows, maybe people are going to come over. and Memele he's going to have food for Shabbos. Don't be sneaky. And if he was sneaky, he's not allowed to eat that food on Shabbos. If he cooked, twice the amount that he needed, because maybe people will end up coming over, even though he's not expecting anybody, well, that food is off limits. So what do we want to say? So we want to say that if he deliberately was sneaky, he's not allowed to eat this food. So let's also say that if a fellow deliberately, he's not necessarily sneaky, he just deliberately cooks on Friday for Shabbos, even though he didn't make an eruvey tavshilin, he also shouldn't be allowed to eat the food, just like when he's deliberately sneaky. To which Rav Ashi says, not necessarily. Being sneaky is worse than being deliberate. That when it says Rav Ashi, when it comes to being sneaky, the rabbis are more stringent with sneakers than with people who are bemazed, people who are deliberately going against halacha. Because at least somebody who deliberately goes against halacha, at least he's aware of the fact that he's being a nudnik. And maybe at some point he'll do tshuva. And if other people see that he's being a nudnik, they're going to say, oh, that guy, he's just being a nudnik. They're not going to learn from him. Sneaky is different. Sneaky is worse. Because maybe then he can convince himself, I'm not really doing anything wrong. Anyways, I'm allowed to cook on Yom Tif. I'm cooking, who knows, maybe people will come. He can kind of, rationalize it and justify it. And therefore, the chance of him doing tshuva is less because in his mind, he's really not doing anything so bad. Other people see him and then they learn from him and they say, oh, maybe that's an okay thing to do. It's much worse. And therefore, says Rav Ashi that when the Beitzah says that if you're sneaky, then you're not allowed to eat it, maybe that's not necessarily a proof that if you intentionally cooked on Yom Tov without an eruvey tavshilin that you should not be allowed to eat it, because maybe we take sneakers more strictly, a more strict approach, a more severe approach to the sneakers than to the deliberators. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Omar Hamani Chananyahi v'Aliba de Beishamai, whereas Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says that the author of this brisa, so meaning, whereas Rav Ashi says you cannot, draw any conclusions from sneaky people to deliberate people. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says maybe you can draw a conclusion. However, this is the opinion specifically of Beis Shammai according to Chananya. The Tanya, as we learn in the Brisa, Chananya Omer says Chananya, Beis Shammai Omer say Beis Shammai ein ofen el im kein erev bepas. You can only bake on Yom Tif if you made an eruvey tavshilin with bread. Vein mavashin el im kein erev betavshil. You can only cook if you made an eruvey tavshilin with a cooked food. Vein tomnin el im kein ayucham and tmunim erev Yom Tif. And you can only insulate things on Yom Tif if you had things insulated already from before Yom Tif. So we see that Beis Shammai sort of has this stringent approach where you can only cook or bake or insulate if you had already cooked or baked or insulated from before Yom Tif. Whereas Beis Hillel say, says Beis Hillel, you can just use one cooked food, make an eruvey tavshilin, and then you can cook, bake, insulate, all that. So we see that according to Chananya, Beis Shammai is being particularly stringent when it comes to eruvey tavshilin. So therefore we want to argue that the opinion that says that if you are sneaky when it comes to eruvey tavshilin, you're not allowed to eat it, maybe that's specifically Beis Shammai according to Chananya, but that's not necessarily the halacha. And therefore, maybe if you're sneaky, I guess you would be able to eat it potentially. And therefore, if you do it on purpose, maybe you can also eat it. Right? We just don't know. Tashma Kamanir Ma'aser Peirosav b'Shabbos. A fellow separates Trumas and Maisus on Shabbos. Now, we don't separate Trumas and Maisus on Shabbos. It's actually going to be the next Mishnah that's coming up at the bottom of the Yomut, which we'll get to tomorrow. B'shogeg yochal, b'mezid lo yochal. So if he separated the Trumas and Maisus by accident, okay, Seder, it's only midrabanan that we don't separate Trumas and Maisus. So if you did it by accident, it's fine. If you did it on purpose, then you're not allowed to eat the food. So what do we see? We see that if you do something on purpose, it's also. So let's say that if you purposely cook on Friday for Shabbos without an eruvey tavshilin, so I would say that you're not allowed to eat the food, just like you're not allowed to eat the food that you separated Trumas and Maisus on purpose on Shabbos. You could argue that no, by Trumas and Maisus, if you did it on purpose, you're not allowed to eat the food because there you have other food that you can eat, so just eat the other food. But over here, you don't have other food to eat, so maybe you would be able to eat the food that you cooked on Friday without an eruvey tavshilin. Tashma Kamanir Hamad Bil Kelev b'Shabbos b'Shogeg Yishtamish Boin b'Mezid Lo Yishtamish Boin. Also, as we're going to learn in the next Mishnah, we don't put things in the mikveh on Shabbos on Shabbos or Yom Tov. we don't put things in the mikveh. But if you did by accident, so you could use them. If you did it on purpose, well, then you can use them. So we want to say the same thing over here. If you cook on purpose, just like if you put something in the mikveh, kelim in the mikveh on purpose on Yom Tov or on Shabbos, you're not allowed to use them. So also if you intentionally cook on Friday for Shabbos, you shouldn't be allowed to eat the food. You could say no, but when it comes to the vessels that we say you're not allowed to use it, if you did it on purpose, maybe it's because you have other vessels you could use. Or that you can always borrow other people's vessels if you need, but that might not be the case by food. Maybe if you did it on purpose, you would be able to eat it. Okay. We have a Beitzah that says that if a fellow cooks on Shabbos by accident, he can eat it. On purpose, he can't eat it. So again, let's say that if he cooks for Yom Tov, for Shabbos on Friday, that's Yom Tov, he should not be allowed to eat it if he does it on purpose. Yisur the Shabbos Shani, to which we say, well, maybe when it comes to Shabbos, which is Nisr Skila, it's a bigger deal. So that's why if he cooks on purpose on Shabbos, he's not allowed to eat the food. But maybe if he cooks on Yom Tov for Shabbos, which is only in Nisr D'Rabbanan, so maybe we would say that he would be allowed to eat it. Okay, so it seems like it's unresolved. We don't quite know what to do if a fellow deliberately cooks on Friday without an eruvey tavshilin for Shabbos. But we haven't succeeded in saying that you would not be allowed to eat it. So, okay, says so the last part of the Mishnah says Beishameh o mishnei tavshilin. So Beishameh had said that you need 2 cooked foods. Beisil says that you can have 1 cooked food. Masisin lo ki aitana detanya. This our Mishnah is not like the following Beitzah. Reb Shimon ben Elazar says Reb Shimon ben Elazar modem Beishameh Beisil al shnei tavshilin shetzarich. That says Reb Shimon ben Elazar that both Beishameh and Beisil agree that you need 2 cooked foods. Beisil also says you need 2 cooked foods. Amanechliku, what do they argue about? What's considered 2 cooked foods? Al dag uveitza sha'olav. If you have a fish that you basted with some egg on it, is that considered 2 foods or 1 food? Beishameh o mishnei tavshilin. Beishameh says, look, you need 2 cooked foods. Fish with some egg on it is not considered 2 cooked foods. Beisil o tavshil echad. And Beisil says, look, this would be fine. In this case, this cooked fish with some egg on it would be enough. That would be fine. V'shavim she'im pirper Beitzah v'nosan l'soch hadog. But they both, Beishameh and Beisil, agree that if you break up an egg and put it on some fish, so you have like a cooked egg and cooked fish, and you make a shidduch, sharise kaflutis, or that you cut up leeks v'nosan l'soch hadog, and you put that in the fish. That sounds very nice. Shein shnei tavshilin. So that would be considered 2 cooked foods. You have you have leeks in fish or eggs in fish. That would be considered 2 cooked foods because they're cooked, on their own right. Omar Rave Hilchasa Ketana Didon V'Alibud Beisilel says Rave that the halacha is like our Tana and our Mishnah, according to Beisilel, that you need 1 cooked food and that is enough. If he ate the eruvey tavshilin or it got lost and he hadn't yet cooked for Shabbos on Friday of Yom Tov, so then you missed your chance, you lost the eruv. So Abai Naktinon Hischel Bisasov V'Nechel Eruvo Gomer. Says Abai, if a fellow began already baking bread and then his eruvey tavshilin got eaten, no problem. He can continue baking. He can continue with making his bread. All right, friends, that was Daf Yud Zayin of Masechta Be'ah. Very interesting daf. So the first part of the daf talked about Shemoneh esrei on Shabbos and Yom Tov. So we say that when Yom Tov is mamash on Shabbos, so then in all the tefillas, in Shachris, in Mincha, in Ma'ariv, so we're going to say Yom Tov Dik Shemoneh esrei, and we mention Shabbos and Yom Tov, and we say Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadesh HaShabbos V'Sov Azmanim. When you have Shabbos of Chol HaMoed or Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, so in that case, Shachris, Mincha, and Ma'ariv are going to be a regular Shabbos Shemoneh esrei, and you'll just say Yale V'Yavo. And at Musaf, you'll say a Yom Tov Dika or Rosh Chodesh Dika Musaf, and say Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadesh Shabbos V'Sov Azmanim. Very, very interesting. Fine. We saw according to Beis Shammai that when Yom Tov falls out on Shabbos, it would be 8 brachos. You would have 7 brachos for Shabbos and for Yom Tov, but Beis Hillel says, and that's of course what we do, is just 7, and you kind of make a merger between Shabbos and Yom Tov, and then we paskin like Rebbe, who says that we say Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadesh HaShabbos v'Yisrael ve'Azmanim. We saw the opinions of Rav Chia bar Ashi Omar Rav and Rava about eruvey tchumen and eruvey tavshilin from one Yom Tov to the next. That Rav Chia bar Ashi says that you're allowed to make an eruvey tchumen. If you have 2 days of Yom Tov during the week and it's a sveka diyoma, you're allowed to put out an eruvey tchumen from one day to the next and make a t'nai and say, look, if today's Yom Tov, so then forget it, but that also means tomorrow's not Yom Tov, so I could travel wherever I want. And if today's not Yom Tov, so then I'm putting on eruvey tchumen for tomorrow, which is Yom Tov. And the same thing for eruvey tavshilin. Rava says that when it comes to eruvey tavshilin, if Thursday, Friday is Yom Tov, so you can make an eruvey tavshilin on Thursday and say, look, today's a weekday, so this is my eruvey tavshilin. If today is Yom Tov, so memele tomorrow's a weekday, and I can cook for Shabbos anyways. Fine. Then we get up to a situation, what happens when a person does not put out an eruvey tavshilin? So we say that if Reuven forgets to put out an eruvey tavshilin, and Shimon's going to cook for him, so Reuven has to sort of give away his ingredients to Shimon in order for Shimon to be able to cook for him. And then we got up to the question of, well, what happens if he cooked anyways? What happens if Reuven cooks anyways, intentionally? Can he eat the food? We tried to bring proofs one way or the other, but we didn't quite resolve, bring a definitive proof either way. And then we got to an alternative understanding of the machlokas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel regarding the eruvey tavshilin. How many foods do you need? In our Mishnah, we had said that Beis Shammai says you need 2 foods. Beis Hillel said that you need 1 food. Over here, we have an alternative reading by Rav Shimon ben Elazar, who says that actually both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel agree that you need 2 foods. The question is, what if you have fish that you basted with some egg? Is that considered 1 food or 2 foods? Beis Shammai says it's considered only 1 food, whereas Beis Hillel says that's fine, that would be considered 2 foods. And then we saw an interesting opinion of Abai at the end, which is that once you already start cooking, or in his case baking, if the eruvey tavshilin gets eaten, so you can continue, which is very interesting. Friends, that was Daf Yud Zayin of Masechta Beitzah. I hope you enjoyed. Cheers.